having been in sales forever, the one biggest thing that I always do is I stand up when I'm making those calls, because again, it's just more energy. You're leaning into it. You're breathing better, like connecting that mind and body. And again, sometimes it sounds woo-woo, but a little woo-woo goes a long way. So you need to be able to sprinkle a little bit of that fairy dust in there to get some results.
This episode is brought to you by BackLooper. If you're tired of learning about guest complaints from online reviews, listen to this. It's time to protect your reputation while still getting valuable data so you can make enhancements to your guest experience. Using the most effective ways to generate responses, combined with intuitive reporting that quickly points out the largest issues, BackLooper enables you to strengthen your operations with superior guest experience intelligence that leads to higher satisfaction. Now more than ever, we need to bring our guests into the conversation so they can be a part of our industry's success. Get started today with no minimum commitment by visiting backlooper.com or email me directly at josh@backlooper.com. Welcome to the Attraction Pros Podcast, where we discuss the latest trends and challenges facing the attractions industry today.
We chat with some of the top leaders in the field and provide resources that will help develop your career in this great industry.
I am Josh Liebman, founder of BackLooper. I help attractions collect guest feedback and identify top priorities needed for improvement.
And I'm Matt Heller, founder of Performance Optimist Consulting. I help leaders lead so they can increase employee engagement and retention.
Now sit upright, hold on tight, and get ready for the Attraction Pros Podcast. Hey, Matt, how's it going?
It's going really well. Did you assume that I would say fantastic?
I usually hear that from you. Fantastic with like 12 A's.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Somewhere in there, yeah. Question. Have you ever listened to episode 54 of the Attraction Pros Podcast?
Well, I think I was there. For it. So I think I heard it live. I did not go back and listen to it recently.
That's okay. I didn't either. But for those of you who are new listeners or subscribers within the last 100+ weeks or so, check out episode 54 with this great interview with Russ Van Natta from Creative Works. And we are really excited because he is back on the Attraction Pros Podcast.
Back. And not even on Sunday.
Falls out of my ear. Right.
So Russ is the first person that has come back to be a second-time guest on the show. We've had other people that were also as part of the COVID-19 video series, but why is Russ back? What's he got to say that's so important?
He's got quite a lot to say. There has been a lot going on with Creative Works and everything that they have been doing on their end with their team, with their resource, and really doing an amazing job serving their clients and really the entire, attractions and family entertainment industry during this time. And so we're going to talk about, the event that they're having, Amusement 360, which is normally an in-person event that they hold in Indianapolis. It is now, of course, virtual. To be able to attend from wherever your location is. So we're going to talk a little bit about that event towards the end of it, but we're really going to talk a lot about some of the philosophies that they've been working on, really, I would say, under the umbrella of challenging assumptions that we need to be doing that during this time and have needed to be doing that throughout the last several months through COVID, and even prior to that, of assumptions that we should have been challenging that maybe would have led to less friction throughout the pandemic, and that hopefully we can get more and more into the mindset as we start to rebound from it as well.
And I think we should be challenging assumptions all the time. Like, this should be part of our practice, right? Mm-hmm. Because there are so many things that we assume that are real, or, as Russ will talk about them, sacred cows, or things that we think just have to be a certain way. And when you really look at the big picture, it probably doesn't have to be that way. So that's why I think, continually to challenge the things that we think are, etched in stone. I think we have to continue to challenge those things. But I also think it's really interesting to talk to Russ about all the different books that he's been reading, and not only just the books, but the practical takeaways. And, we've had a number of episodes that, I say right up at the beginning, get your notes ready, write these things down. We're going to put a lot of those things in the show notes, but there's a lot of really great nuggets in here. And one of the most important things that, Russ talks about is not just reading the book, right? Don't just pick up a book or listen to a book or whatever, and then continue to get all this other information in. We have to do something with this information. We have to take action. So at some point, there's got to be, that kind of line in the sand. Okay, I've learned something. I've taken this away. Now, how do I apply it? So it's great to hear Russ talk about that as well.
I just had a totally random thought and idea that just came to mind. I'm gonna present this to you, Matt, in real time. What if, while you're listening to this, or if you're watching this, not only to do that with the books that you're reading, but if there's something that comes up throughout the course of this podcast interview of all the topics and the concepts that we're about to discuss that sparks some sort of thought that will lead to action, then tell us what you're going to do on social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram, where you can share that with us. And then we're about to mention a whole bunch of books too. And we'll give you one of those books of choice, or we will enter you into a drawing to win one of those books of choice.
That's awesome.
Can we just continue on this trend? I think we're kind of we're starting to get into a habit of maybe doing that.
I think so.
On occasion.
And here's the challenge I would put out there, even beyond this, whether a book is on the line or not, is we love to hear when you have learned something from, one of our guests or something that we've said. And, whether you share that with us in an email, you share that on social media, we'd love to hear more about how you are utilizing the podcast. One of the things that Josh and I joke about is that sometimes we don't know who the listeners are. We see numbers. We don't always know who the specific people are, but when we could get together and people would come up to us at a trade show and say, "Hey, I listened to that one episode. It was really great." It's like a drive-by, right? And we love those, but we'd love to hear more about the things that you're utilizing from the podcast, and even suggestions you might have for other people that you'd like to hear about, or other topics you'd like us to explore. Because really, we are all attraction pros, and we want to make sure that we are serving you in the best way possible.
Absolutely, 100%. So with that in mind, should we get to this amazing conversation with Russ Van Natta?
Absolutely.
Let's do it.
Russ Van Natta, VP of Business Development for Creative Works. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Attraction Pros podcast. Russ, how are you?
Oh, if I was any better, I'd be a twin. I'm so excited to be here with you guys. I love the opportunity to nerd out with you guys on things like this, and I'm thrilled to be back. So how are you guys doing?
Doing well.
Doing
really
yeah.
well. And you mentioned something right there that brings out that this is a very unique episode, something we really haven't done in its full form in the podcast. You said it's great to be back. With that said, welcome back.
Thank you.
This is the first two-time guest or two-time interview we've had. So this is a first for Attraction Pros.
Well, the pressure is on, and hopefully we won't disappoint, but I think we've got some cool things that we can explore that will definitely build upon what we've done in the past, but give us some things to work on for the future as well. So
yeah, I was going to say you set the bar pretty high last time with the last interview. So tell us. I was going to say, what's been going on now?
Man, all things COVID have really been revolutionizing some things for us as it has within the industry in general. But I have to say, while we felt pain points like most people have, I have this really bad habit of being super optimistic, and so it's been an opportunity where we've taken the last 6 months especially to focus on how can we look for opportunities within this time frame. How are things changing? What do we need to be doing different? So it's really been a long 6-month period of how do we help our guests through this time and providing assets and resources for them? How do we then change to be able to weather storms for them as well? And so it's everything from looking at our personnel, looking at our processes, looking at our products, but also looking at ourselves personally and developing new tools to be able to be more strategic and more intentional in how we do different things so we can manifest our own destiny, so to speak, with different elements. And so that was one of the things that I'm super excited to get to talk to you guys today, is one, just sharing some lessons from much smarter people for me that I've come across over this last time frame, but also just giving a punch list of really great assets and resources that start to make the unknown much less scary, and something that we can lean into to start carving out and you know, peeling back layers of an onion, so to speak, to create something new and beautiful.
That's awesome. Russ, before we started recording, you said that you have 2 gears, fast and faster.
Yes.
So I'm also curious, because you're talking about reflecting and being more strategic. So can you talk to me about how those kind of go together, like being fast and faster, but then also being a little bit more strategic?
Yeah, so that is, as a hardcore ADD specialist, you know, that's always a fun exercise for me. What I've really actually done is taken some time to do, you know, some meditation and breath work exercises and things like that, just knowing that one of my own natural, you know, it can be a strength or it can be a weakness, and depending on which context it's used in, but making sure that I'm just creating a little bit of balance with that. So, you know, it sounds a little woo-woo, and sometimes it is, but it really helps me just calm the mind a little bit and actually get some deeper dive thought exercises and things like that. So even a basic meditation app that you can get on the App Store goes a long way, and it doesn't have to be something where you're, you know, doing it for 30 minutes. It's even a 2-minute breathing exercise or something like that before you start getting into some strategic thought processes. Just get some oxygen in your brain and just helps it go a little better. So, you know, when I'm slowing down for meditation, I'm probably going at a normal speed instead of a slowed down speed. But it's just, you know, some of that self-awareness, I think, is really key as you're trying to look at the things from a new perspective. And so that's definitely one I've had to fold in for sure.
Russ, what does your meditation routine look like? I'm really curious to hear how you internalize it and how you get out of it what you want to get out.
For sure. So really the thing is, and again, it's really more of just kind of taking some breaths and being present. And I use the Sam Harris Waking Up app. It's pretty solid. And he's got some guided stuff just to help you focus on the breath, focus on things that are popping up into your mind, recognizing that when those little thought bubbles do come into play, is just recognizing that they're there and not necessarily having to give energy into them right then and there, and recognizing that that's just part of being human. And so really just trying to be more present in the moment is definitely what that is. So, you know, paying attention to your breath, paying attention to different thoughts, paying attention to, you know, how your body's feeling, and noting what that feels like. So it's really one of those, like, am I anxious? Is this excitement? Is this anxiety? Is this something where I need to kind of write it down so that way I can push it to the side temporarily? So really taking some time like that. And then other than that, I've also done some breathing exercises on YouTube that you can get. It's just taking some deep breaths and taking a moment. So it can be as formal or as informal as you need it to be, just to help you calm the mind for a few minutes, for sure.
Yeah. You know, Russ, one of the things that you were just talking about that I think is endlessly fascinating is how the mind and body work together.
Man.
But we don't always think about that, right? We don't always
Right.
think about when the body is healthy, that it actually strengthens the mind, and vice versa. You know, so I'm curious what sort of effects you've seen, you know, in the breathing exercises or any other kind of body care that you've been doing that's also helped your thought process.
Yeah, it's one of those where, yeah, it's definitely a self-fulfilling cycle, and both, it's a very tandem approach that you take. And so I've just found that, one, it helps me resist some immediate reaction. So, you know, as I'm working with more of our team members now with just my expanded role within the company, you're dealing with more, you know, problems or frustrations and things like that. And so being able to be more present and actually hear what they're bringing to the table definitely starts to help. So that way you can intentionally listen more. You're not necessarily crafting what the response is just by doing some of those basic breathing exercises. Sometimes just dealing with the day-to-day stress too, it helps you think a little bit more clearly as well. But it's also one where I'll also go and, you know, I'll do walks and, you know, 20 minutes, 30 minutes on my lunch break, something like that, just to get the blood flowing. It's just your brain needs that to be able to process things appropriately. And so it's little things, taking some deep breaths, really trying to just stay focused and present and not immediately crafting what your reaction or narrative would be, but truly taking in that information. I would say my employees definitely feel that there's been a step up in that, in that department, but also I feel better and it makes you just a little bit more open to opportunities that you might otherwise not see.
Sure. Yeah. Well, one of the things that I'm curious in how you do is clear all thoughts out of your head. That's one of the things with meditation, that it's like, okay, if you're thinking about clearing your thoughts, then that's a thought about clearing it. And how do you know when you're doing it? And if you recognize that you're doing it, or you're already undoing it?
100%. That is a whole vortex. And as soon as I get to that level, I will let you know. So I'm certainly not executing that well. But really the big thing for me is just recognize it's okay. Like if I'm here and I'm trying to just focus solely on the breath and I'm just trying to cover that breath in and out with my awareness, if something does pop in, just recognizing, okay, that's there, and then letting it disappear a little bit, and then I can come back to it. And so I would venture to say that most people that go into these things do think, okay, I have to achieve this nothingness, this complete blank thing. That's not been my experience. Just from a practical implementation of it, it's been a lot more of, okay, well, that's there. I don't have to give that a lot of energy right now. Just notice that it's happened and then try and return back to, really intentionally focusing on the breath or something like that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I know I've done over this kind of shutdown time is that my wife and I got a dog.
Oh.
And taking that dog for a walk has been not only great for me physically, because we live in a really hilly environment, but just a great way to, I can listen to a podcast or, just listen to nothing. And it's just a great way to kind of get out and get fresh air. And, when I was working at Universal, I was working inside all the time, because I was working in HR, but I would get out during lunch and I would walk through the park, and, it's just great to get that different perspective. And I know that's something that you advocate certainly. And, as we talked a little bit before the recording, we talked a lot about challenging assumptions, which to me is about kind of changing your perspective. So I'm wondering if you kind of unwrap that a little bit for us and tell us what you've been thinking there.
Well, so the big thing that I've really looked at over the last 6 months and our whole leadership team has is, okay, it's what can we do as far as being there for our team, being a good North Star and carving a path forward. And we had a lot of assumptions before all of this kicked off, right? We really thought that our industry specifically was so immune to financial ups and downs because of how 2008, 2009 went, when our industry really held relatively steady, right? And so now this is a different type of financial piece because there's other elements where it's actually restricting people's ability to come in to our facilities. And so it's just a brand new problem that we didn't really think about being on our radar. And that was a poor assumption that we had. And now that we've got it, we need to start exploring, where footholds and new elements and where can we sneak our foot in the door to start getting some traction and moving in a new direction. So it really comes down to, man, if things seem to be going all too well, what else do we need to start thinking about potentially? Or if things are going so well, are we just going with the flow, or are we still taking time to look strategically at things? And for us, it's really now, this is not an exercise that can hurt in either direction, right? In good times or bad, this is something that it's like flossing and brushing your teeth on a daily basis. It's just good hygiene for your mental, agility. And that way it puts you in a position to not be caught off guard as much. Now, this is obviously something at such a large scale that caught us off guard, but if you start training your mind to challenge assumptions and things and exploring both sides of a piece, then when something unexpected does come up, it again just puts you in a position to start looking at things more logically, exploring for what is actually true, and what might be a myth or a fear that's surrounding it. And so we've been diving into, as a leadership team here at Creative Works, we've been diving into a ton of books. I mean, that is our big thing. We have an open Audible list that we have where all of our employees have access to it and they can listen to it, different things. And so the stuff that I've really been drawn to, the first one is The Road Less Stupid by Keith Cunningham. And I love this book. So he was a big financial guy. He's a good old Texas, good old boy. And he narrates the audiobook himself. I'm a big fan of audiobooks, Matt, like you said, when I'm going for walks, being able to listen to that and multi-purpose it and get my mind and body in sync a little bit more. But The Road Less Stupid, and I love it because the thing that he talks about in here is the vast majority of dumb tacks in both our lives and our businesses are a direct result of these three things. One, generalizations, which kill clarity. Two, obsessing about Oz instead of the yellow brick road. And three, faulty assumptions or ignoring risk. And so those kinds of things where he really focuses on is what are better questions that we can ask ourselves to, if things are good, how do we make them great? If things are bad, how do we make them better? And so it's finding these unasked questions, separating the problem from the symptom, checking assumptions, considering kind of the second order consequences or the ripple effects, and then creating the machine that will actually execute this. And so his whole book is about taking some time to think strategically every day and giving yourself some pieces. And in every chapter, he's got great takeaways in it. He talks about, here's some really good kind of high-end open-ended questions and frameworks that I can start looking at individual pieces through. Because for someone like me who tends to shoot from the hip a little bit more as my initial piece, like taking the time to slow down so I can ultimately go faster, serves that fast and faster speed, and really just helps me make sure that I'm just not nose blind to things that may be out into the market, right? And I think nose blind is a good term that we all had going in with our businesses. But out of that, we've now created new ways to do business, new ways to engage and help customers and guests. And this is the 2020 is the year of the pivot in my book. So really being able to think strategically of how we can start to do that, that's been the first one that's really helped me start to challenge assumptions. Some other books that I'm absolutely in love with right now is The Art of Possibility by Rosalind Stone and Ben Zander. So they're a husband and wife, and Ben Zander has this amazing TED Talk on YouTube. He's the musical director for the Boston Philharmonic. And so this book is all about exploring, again, challenging assumptions. It comes back to a lot of that of, everything in life is pretty much invented. And so the circumstances are invented, and we find little small pieces of data to kind of fill in gaps of a narrative that we may already believe. And so that's how do we start challenging those assumptions? If it is all invented, what can we invent for ourselves? And just being open to the idea that the path in front of you isn't necessarily the path that you have to be on, and you can start a new path yourself. And so that was really, it's a very uplifting one. Keith Cunningham is very like down to brass tacks, and so this is the opposite end of the spectrum for that one, where it's a nice uplifting, creative thought flow process that goes along with it. And then a couple of other books, I'm a big Brene Brown fan. My wife got me turned on to her. I'm just such a big fan of what she talks about, because it's really opening yourself up to being vulnerable and not letting that be something that causes your reactions out of shame or guilt to be able to drive what your decisions are, but kind of stopping, being present, doing more of that. And another book that I've really been digging is The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. And so this talks about what are these great challenges that these inventors and historical figures have gone through. And really the big thing that one focuses on is the first thing, how to turn an obstacle into an advantage is one, looking at the perception of the obstacle. And so Rockefeller, they talk about him and how he was looking at the financial crisis before he had made all of his money, was really when he saw people reacting, it was reacting out of fear and panic. And if he was not doing that, then and people that weren't also doing that were actually able to make more calculated steps. So they may not be reacting first, but they're reacting correctly. And so that was a really interesting mindset. And then it also flows into taking then correct action via flexibility and creativity. And so it talks about Amelia Earhart and how she wanted to be this pilot, and she wanted to do the transatlantic flight, but the first time around, she really had to stair-step her way up into that by being a passenger on one of the first transatlantic flights. So that way she could make more connections and get more opportunities. And so focusing on what your end goal is, but then what are near objective elements that you could also achieve that will get you closer to that end piece. And then the last one is that perseverance. And they do a great example of Alexander the Great had this untamable horse, and no one could ever ride it. He was so strong, and he would just buck everybody off that as soon as they tried to get on him. And so what he did was, that was the horse's strength, right? It was strength and power. And so what he did was he allowed the horse to run and run and run on a straight line until it was so tired that then he could get on, and it had used all of its strength to a point of weakness, to which then he could get on it and start to steer and control and actually tame the horse. So some of these things where we see all of this momentum that just builds and seems like, okay, well, if we try and just jump onto it, how, and then we get thrown off, how can we let it kind of use its own steam and momentum to eventually create an opportunity, maybe being patient, letting it play out a little bit more, and then being ready for that opportunity once it's there, and not giving up, and knowing that there's an opportunity for us to jump on eventually. So those are some of the books that I've really been diving down on, but they are awesome. Another really good one, the last one that I just finished, was No Ego by Cy Wakeman. And that's really just, hey, you're a human being. You're going to have your ego in here. How do you get drama out of the workplace? How do you ask the right questions when folks bring problems to you to help them look at things from a solution-oriented piece? Still giving them an opportunity to vent, but instead of coming back with answers, maybe challenging them with questions. And by challenging, not, pushing against them, but getting them to explore what that could look like themselves too. So those are some real great books. And honestly, I need to go back through them and listen to them a couple more times, because there's a lot of meat on those bones. But it's been an awesome reading list that I've really enjoyed over the last 6 months for sure.
So real quickly, running through that then, The Road Less Stupid by Keith Cunningham.
Yep.
The Art of Possibility by, you said, was it
Rosstone and
Ross
Ben
Stone.
Zander.
Got it. Brene Brown, I think she have 2 books, Daring Greatly.
Yes, Daring Greatly and Dare to Lead are both great ones. And The Obstacle is the Way.
The Obstacle is the Way. And No Ego.
Yeah.
All right. We'll put all those in the show notes, and I'm adding them all to my Amazon list right now. You have effectively sold every single one of them.
Well, and some of this too, some of it's just finding cooler tools to be able to work through this. So Josh, we had talked a few weeks ago about this system called Blinkist, where you can get on and get essentially Cliff Note versions to see what you want to explore more of or less of. And so a lot of these books are on there where you can get some snippets and readings and summaries of those things. But really, I went back through and looked at all of these things. It's really looking at what are the bad assumptions or just biased assumptions that we have going into a situation. How do we stop? How do we think about those objectively, and what are real actionable tools and questions we can use to do that, instead of just like, oh, I'm just going to go think. Like, these actually have tangible takeaway exercises that you can use to do that. And then, is there an opportunity to move forward to get away from, kind of sacred cows or things that we thought were just laws of physics that turned out to be, not.
So were there any moments while you were reading these books, listening to these books, reading the Blinkist notes on them, where you like had some sort of moment where you're like, okay, I need to stop what I'm doing right now and start putting this into action, and what that looked like? Yeah.
And so that one thing that I was thinking about just the other day was, okay, well, now we're really struggling to get, one, work against in-home entertainment. That's been a building piece within our industries typically anyway. But two, how do we start to take something that we traditionally see as out-of-home entertainment, and how could we start to make that something that's in-home entertainment? And so Bob Cooney was doing a talk. I know he's been on the show in the past, and love Bob, and he did a little piece on this company called Vampire Pizza. And so they do this awesome takeout, really good pizza, but then they deliver this game in a box, and it's a disposable piece, but it's kind of bringing game night and family night back into the home. And so now that, then I thought of that, I'm like, well, okay, we could look at something like that. Or, there are other things in the past where, again, and I'm in the early stages of workshopping through this, but we'll see it, but it's something that I think is worth exploring was, okay, well, what about, we have had different examples of bringing entertainment out to people's homes, right? And a lot of that would come through mobile laser tag, mobile axe throwing, those kinds of inflatables and things. But in our industries, sometimes those tend to have some, connotations of low budget or not a lot of money that folks would be willing to spend on it. And then I was thinking, well, gosh, we've really done a great job as an industry as far as raising the bar of what people are willing to spend on an experience as we've moved into this. And so do we have the opportunity to create more high-end mobile experiences and in-home experiences? Because right now the buying behaviors of folks, you know, some are coming out and doing things, others do want to stay home, but they want to stay in small groups with people that they know. And so, you know, if we take a look at, okay, what's worked in the past with mobile, and what are some new processes and procedures and just level of experiences that we could ramp up with new technologies and things. So sometimes it could be a physical something being brought back out, but you also have operators like 2-Bit Circus out of California that were essentially taking trivia night and hosting a little mini TV show regularly and streaming it on their website to get folks in and engaged. So that way, when they are ready to actually do one of their out-of-home experiences, we're still on the top of their list or their radar as far as entertainment goes. But then I'm also able to keep folks regularly engaged in an entertaining way. So that's kind of the next little piece that I'm interested to peel back more and start to see what could be done well. You know, what are things that might be easier now than they were before to be able to accomplish something like that. And really, it starts coming down to, what does this look like if it was simple? And so it's, okay, well, in a perfect world, I'd love to be able to deliver somebody an in-home VR experience. So I'd have, you know, a headset and a, you know, and a TV, you know, hey, have this kind of TV, plug your headset in, and do I have a hosted digital software platform that they can log into and they can do some of these games too? And then I come back and pick up my entertainment gear after the fact, right? So some delivery rental kind of a piece. Now, some people may initially say, well, gosh, whoa, that's going to be way too expensive. You're going to have people steal these things. Like, there are methods and tools and tactics that we can get into to work around those. The big thing for me is not getting into the tyranny of how, when we're initially starting to look at that stuff. So it's just, okay, what if we could do this? And what if it was simple? And someone like Elon Musk is a freaking genius when it comes to that kind of stuff, who, you know, and none of the stuff that he does is simple. But when you drill it down, it's, okay, well, what are the things that I want to be able to do? And what would that start to look like if it was simple? Like, at least getting some of those things moving and grooving in your brain to start, then worry about what and how you're going to be able to execute that with. But so much of the time, things stop before they ever get started because we don't take a moment. You know, we let ourselves get bogged down with the negative connotations first.
Russ, I'm loving everything you're talking about, and I think we could probably spend at least an episode like on each one of those little nuggets.
Yeah.
But I'd love to the onion that I'd like to peel back a little bit.
Please.
Is from your perspective as a leader within your organization, right? Mm-hmm. Because I think it's one thing for us to say, hey, I'm going to challenge my own assumptions, mm-hmm. right? And be able to work through some of those issues. But you're also leading teams that have mm-hmm. to challenge their assumptions. And I actually went off camera just for a second because I wanted to grab this.
Yeah.
Because I still have this from the last time I was out seeing you guys.
Yeah, that was back when it was laser tag 360.
I know, yeah. But going through your facility and your offices was really impressed by the culture. So this is going to come around to something because mm-hmm. this is something that could be foundational to other human beings where they've got these fears of challenging their assumptions. And, mm-hmm. you know, as great a guy as Russ is he really going to accept this new idea or this crappy first draft?
Right.
How do you get over that? So I guess my ultimate question is about the company culture and how do you get other people to challenge assumptions and get over the fear that might have a detriment to their career?
For sure. It's like anything, you know, one, we've been really fortunate that the starting point that we've had with our ownership and management teams has been relatively open. Now, that doesn't mean that we're immune to it because everyone has fear of exposing themselves or putting themselves out there and what that's going to mean if it's not well received or things like that. So really it's one, we put in this mindset of a very open, autonomous, and self-empowered culture. You know, we started that with how we've tried to run meetings and things like that, but really where we've seen the biggest leap in that over the last 6 months, again, is as we started getting into things like lean manufacturing and taking that into our process. And so for those of you who don't know what lean manufacturing is, it's been around for quite a while. It's the Toyota manufacturing system. There are some phenomenal books out there on it, but essentially it's about giving your employees the opportunities to fix what bugs them. And so the really hard thing that we find is as owners and operators and leaders is we talk about autonomy, we pay all this lip service to it, and then as soon as someone tries to take an initiative and do something, it's not exactly how we would have done it the first time around. We slap the hand and they're like, well, okay, never doing that again, thanks. So we, it's like what Cesar Millan says, there are no bad dogs, only bad owners. So if you're not actively and positively reinforcing, like taking that moment of, hey, I love the fact that you just tried to handle this and solve this problem for the client. If we see this problem happen again, what's a good way that what's a way that we could start to do this every time so it's the best result possible, and make sure that everyone's kind of trained and beefed up on the right way to do that. So now instead, even if it wasn't exactly what was done right, it's recognizing positive intent. It's recognizing the initiative that they took, and you want to positively reinforce that every single time. But then you're also soliciting their advice because they're someone that's in the trenches. They're seeing this problem more consistently and from different angles than what you are. And so now they have a sense of ownership of fixing it. And then they're going to be more of an advocate for getting that down through the rest of the team. And so one of the pieces that we also do with the lean manufacturing, so 2 Second Lean is a great book, and it really, they focus a lot on how to start rolling this out into any business. And so it's looking at, we started doing full employee staff meetings at 9 o'clock every day. And so our production staff members and our office staff members all coming together. We do recognitions of what we have seen other people do that has either helped us or helped the company. We talk about failures that we've made. So everyone goes through and ownership management, everyone's like, hey, I really did I paid a dumb tax by doing this way. I didn't set a consistent reminder on my calendar to be able to do this thing, and I dropped the ball on it. So one, being really open that failure or pitfalls are okay, and that there's no getting around those, and quite frankly that's going to get us to where we need to be sooner because we're actually learning the lessons of why those are important to do. But then also really getting down into nitty-gritty and evaluating what's working, what's not. How do we start to standardize things that could be repeated over and over again so we're consistently getting great results, and things like that. So that's a big part, is just creating an atmosphere that's open, being really true to being open with that, and also sharing the fact that failure is going to be part of this, but that's not what's going to get you in trouble. It's really, folks get in trouble here when they don't try to learn or grow from these things. I could care less the fact that you gave a guest, a $50 card in one instance if it was the right thing to do to calm down someone that's super amped up or tweaked out. But now we can take a look at that and say, okay, well, this is something that we can do, but how would we tweak it to make it sustainable, and how do we then standardize it? Because problems are going to be something that we deal with every day. I just want to be dealing with new problems, not the same ones. And lean was an awesome process for us to really go through and start to kind of boil away the bad stuff or the less productive stuff for us.
Totally. And I mean, lean manufacturing, I started doing some research on it last year. So I know last time we talked, I mentioned the book, The Lean Startup by Eric Ries. And you mentioned 2 Second Lean. And what I loved about it is, because it really talks about Toyota as kind of like the shining example of it, but all of the practices being able to be implemented into business. So when you think of lean manufacturing, you take all those processes and they can be applicable in so many areas of life.
For sure.
Like one of my favorite lessons that I got from the book, or one of the things that I loved learning about, was small batch production. So like if you have 10 cars that you need to manufacture, and there's 50 steps or 50 like components of the assembly line or so, the large batch production would be, okay, we do part 1 every single time, for all cars, and then part 2, every single time, and then part 3. But if there's a flaw in part 1 or part 2, the entire process is going to be ruined, and you're going to notice it like when you've already almost fully assembled every single.
And then you're going to have to go back and make those changes on
start it over.
30 of the 50 before you realize that there's a problem. And that's that one piece flow piece that is really critical of, and it's mapping out a process of like, this is how this starts, this is what's going to happen next. It's forcing you to do strategic planning, but then if you do run into something, and then it's noting that and figuring out, okay, how do we fix that moving forward? And sometimes it seems counterintuitive because it's thinking, oh man, I'm going to have to start over and do all these things over again. But doing that is going to catch the mistakes or potential hazards so much faster, and then you're only having to fix it once as opposed to going back and fixing it, dozens of times. And
that can be, or I was just gonna say, it could be applied in like so many areas of life,
100%.
whether it's about like finding problems or even just like having a better overall efficiency. So like in the book, the author gives the examples of like stuffing folders. So it's like, all right, you've got this page and this page and this page. Like I have constantly been finding new areas. Like I've applied it to washing dishes and cleaning my kitchen. I'm like, oh man, small batch production. I'm doing one at a time, and getting it done actually much quicker. And then everything is just like always clean because everything is just more efficient throughout the entire process rather than like letting all the dishes pile up. So that's obviously like it's almost like the opposite end of the spectrum of like manufacturing cars. So that just shows how how widely applicable the concept is.
Well, and you're 100% right. One, this can be applied to stuff at home. So one of the challenges that we give every day on the lean call is what's something in your home life that you've leaned up, right? And so it was one where one of our employees was like, well, I try and keep all of my individual like different utensils, like the big forks, the little forks, the big spoons, the little spoons, like all of those pre-grouped and in the same place within the dishwasher, so I can just grab all of those at once and put them in the drawer. And it's a small example, but again, that's not rocket science, but it's a little thing that's slightly ineffective, that again, we can accumulate the efficiencies of those and have them compound together. But from an operator standpoint within our business, it's one, like how many times do we get frustrated that like a checklist isn't getting done properly, or something isn't being done right from a process or a procedure? Well, we can start to look at those things. We can create process maps, and in those process maps, you start to understand the intention and the need for each of those steps. So it's one, getting better understanding from your employee standpoint. It's creating a more consistent guest experience because things are accurately done. The bathrooms are cleaned and they're clean the way that they need to, and they're clean the way that they need to every time. And so it's standardizing those things so that way it's not as difficult, but it allows you to just focus your effort and energies onto, the things that truly matter as well. So there's a huge opportunity. Like I'm really kicking around the idea of creating like a whole FEC lean like mini series or something that I want to be able to put out on for folks to be able to have as part of our like learning management system and our video libraries and stuff, because there are so many things. This is such a universally applicable system that it's amazing. So we're 6 months in. It's typically, we'll see it's truly like a year to get fully implemented with lean, or at least get to that kind of 90% mark where you're really humming on all cylinders, because there are some things that just take longer. You may start a change, but based on how things operate, it may take a little bit longer to get those fully kind of transitioned over. Some things are immediate, but we've seen a drastic increase in the amount of work that we get done by fewer people, so that way we can actually have more horsepower to get other team members freed up to focus on other things. So this compounding effect where you're not necessarily looking for one big thing to change, you're looking for 10 small things that you can adjust the knobs and the levers on just so slightly to where they start to compound and get you way further faster. So it's got huge opportunities for our industry in so many ways.
Yeah, that reminds me of when people say we have to do more with less, but then there's no strategy around how to do that, right?
Right.
They're just given more responsibility or more tasks and less resources, and then they're just told go. Right. So what you're talking about is actually putting some practices behind that and strategically thinking about how to actually make that happen.
Yeah.
I think ultimately you're gonna burn people out if that's all you're doing. If you're just giving them more stuff and taking away resources, that's all you're gonna do.
Well, and then people will actually, like our staff have actually been actively seeking out new things. So we have an internal chat list. And so it's before and after videos of, hey, this was something that was super ineffective. Now this is how I fixed it. And so it may inspire someone else. So we're sharing in these things. It's also just helping us tune the antenna to start looking for other problems. So if you like, how many of us would love that our employees would start just fixing problems, right? Like think like an owner. It's like, well, heck yeah. Like it's the only thing I've ever been, preaching for forever. It's like, well, teach them how to do it. Give them a system and a platform that they can do that, and that it's positively reinforced. And that way, then you're not having to micromanage it, and magically you'll start to see a lot more effective, results from it. But the other thing too that you have to be prepared for is you're also going to highlight some sore spots or some folks on your team that you probably need to reevaluate where they are, or the fact that they're even on your team in the first place. And sometimes that can be scary, but ultimately, we got to prune the trees to create healthier growth from that standpoint. And so, it's one of those of, okay, if I want people that have this mindset and this, optimistic outlook and solution oriented, I need to give a framework for that instead of being like, man, wouldn't, coulda, woulda, shoulda. I just wish they would. It's like, give them a playbook. And this is a great way to start giving them a playbook to do it. So that way you can move on to other stuff.
Yeah. One of the other things that I just thought about when we're talking about doing more with less is another author to just throw into the mix here is Josh Linkner.
Okay.
He has 3 books, The Road to Reinvention, Disciplined Dreaming, and Hacking Innovation. And I just like devoured all 3 of them, was so inspired. And one of the many different like practices that he talked about was intentionally setting barriers or setting limitations. So when we're talking about doing more with less, of actually doing it like intentionally. Matt, I know you and I have talked a number of times of back when, we used to be able to like go to a coffee shop to actually like get work done. I would go without my laptop charger. So I knew that I'm like just running on battery. So like my resources are finite and my productivity would be accelerated. And so he talks about like different things like that. And you can do that intentionally, but you can also do it from a reactive standpoint as well. Like I ran into a limitation, with BackLooper for a client where they wanted to do a specific feature, but the way that I had it wasn't able to do it. So I said, all right, this is the limitation. This is what we need to do. This is what I can't do. And then kind of after sort of working through a few different options and possibilities, a few that worked, a few that didn't work, actually ended up producing something that was even better than what it was before and was even more than what the client was asking for. So was able to add even more value to it. And in this case was able to do it without any cost to the client or to the business. So when we talk about it from like a product development standpoint, or whether it's operational procedures or overall like business development, then those limitations and those parameters can come into play
for sure
to your advantage rather than disadvantage.
Well, and so much of that, just again, it's taking the time, being intentional, but creating a little bit of, so, it's funny, we talked about, meditating and getting calm and all of that. Sometimes then you need to inject some pressure pot elements to kind of force some creativity and ingenuity, whether at a macro level, that's an big pivot point for the industry as a whole, or just, giving yourself, okay, I'm going to do this for 30 minutes. I'm going to kind of bumper lane myself into this. And it can kind of force some new ways or things, because you don't necessarily get caught up in the how at first, and it forces you to just get some stuff on paper to let your mind start moving forward for sure. So, it's giving yourself a little bit of grace, but also kicking yourself in the butt when you need to, for sure.
Yeah, I think with everything, right, there's balance, right? And you were talking about strengths and weaknesses earlier, and kind of one of the closely held beliefs that I have is anytime you have a strength but you overuse it, it becomes a weakness. Right. And vice versa. So one of the things that I've been, I guess, struggling with a little bit during this COVID is challenging my own assumptions. Right. And knowing that, my whole world was built on doing presentations in person. And one of the things that I kind of had assumed that I figured out last week was, well, by the time this airs, it'll be a couple of weeks ago, but whenever I was facilitating or trying to train a session, my computer was low. I was sitting down, doing it virtually. Well, last week I did a webinar and I actually stood up. I raised the computer way up high and I stood up like I was training in a regular room. And I was like, wow, this is so different, right? Such a small thing, but it was like, now I'm more in the right mindset of what I was doing before. And so now I can actually use what I felt was a strength in the past, whereas I was almost kind of holding that back, just because I felt like, well, I have to sit down because that's where my computer is.
Right. Right. And it's a small assumption. And that's a thing too, like, okay, well, when you're going to talk with a client about their sales rep, it's like, okay, do you make calls sitting down? How's your body, your body language, your body posture? Like having been in sales forever, the one biggest thing that I always do is I stand up when I'm making those calls, because again, it's just more energy. You're leaning into it. You're breathing better, like connecting that mind and body. And again, sometimes it sounds woo-woo, but a little woo-woo goes a long way. So you need to be able to sprinkle a little bit of that fairy dust in there to get some results. And, it's smile while you're talking through things, kind of, bring forth the energy that you're trying to push through, because again, now video calls and things like that have started to make that a lot easier. But again, it's like, okay, well, if that makes that good, how do I make it great? What's one little change or tweak that I could do to improve that? And standing up, it just gets you, your brain's firing a little bit more. It's having to pump more blood through your system. And so it just gets the synaptic gaps firing in your brain too.
Yeah. And it felt almost normal.
Right.
Like that was the big takeaway, right? Is that this feels like what I've done for however many years.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that made it more comfortable and made everything else, in my opinion, just flow a little bit better. For
sure. Well, and that's the little thing. It's, again, if this isn't the ideal situation, what are things that I can control that would get that back to as close to an ideal situation as possible, for sure.
Yeah. Well, Russ, we started this interview talking about clearing your mind and meditative, and from that calm aspect. And I got to tell you, now towards the end of it, I'm more fired up than ever. But I like to consider that a success.
Yeah.
So I might need to meditate later to kind of let all this sort of brew and kind of marinate, if you will. But before we wrap this up, we want to talk a little bit about an event that Creative Works is having virtually.
Yeah.
And tell us a little bit about it.
So it's speaking of pivoting and reimagining. So we've always done our educational event 3 times a year. It's now Amusement 360, and it used to be Laser Tag 360, but we expanded it a year ago. And so, that was always an in-person event. It's a 2.5-day educational boot camp, and it's facility tours and all of that. Well, we pivoted that to be a virtual event, so that way we could reach more folks, and it's been phenomenal. It's allowing us to help more folks just come, get exposed to new content, new ways of thinking, collaborate with other operators, collaborate with partners, so that way you can get some mastermind effects going on. And so we design it for existing operators looking to expand or reinvigorate certain aspects of their business, but we also have things for new operators. So this one is coming up. It's October 6th and 7th. And then on the 8th, there's actually a bonus day of operator roundtable. So we've got a couple of different options. So one, there's a free entry point where if you go to amusement360.com, you can just register for the free portion. Day one, we have a lot of talking seminars. We've got folks like Jerry Marola, who's talking about financing and how do you protect cash flow and things like that in this current environment. But then day two, we do a ton of operator interviews. And so we've, in the past, we've had Eddie Hammond from Andretti's and Michael Browning from Urban Air. And so this time around, we've got 5 really great operators that are going to be helping us out. So, everything from indoor, outdoor facilities, multi-site facilities, tourist locations, all of that to really look at, okay, well, what are you doing with your business right now? What's been working for you? What isn't? Where are you starting to look at, new growth segments and things to be able to handle limited capacity, and how do you dynamically flex your existing infrastructure to help with some of that? And so it's going to be rocking. It's one of the big things that I love more than anything about what we do, just because it does help people, at least think about things in a different light and start to challenge, like we've talked about, challenge assumptions or pick the brains of other people that have done it before and been there before. And so we're looking forward to it. We're also excited to have both of you on there for the start of day 2, where we'll be talking about, how do you get more engagement and feedback from your customers, and how do you start to actually do something with that data instead of just kind of, half. I'm gonna walk that back halfway going the distance and actually making it into something that could be tangible. And so we're really stoked for that, and encourage anybody who's looking to, again, seek new opportunities to grow and expand. This is perfect for that. It's very tailored down into the day-to-day pieces as well as the high-level pieces of our industry.
Russ, I'm curious, while we've got you here, just if you could look into your crystal ball to 2021, even 2022. I know you've done
Sure.
these these events over and over again. You know, when we get past the point where we don't have to do everything virtually.
Right.
I'm just curious, do you anticipate continuing to do some of these things virtually, just because what you just said, you have such a larger reach, you know, and that's one of the things that I've enjoyed about this opportunity, is that we can reach so many more people, and yet we still love the in-person. So I'm curious if you anticipate seeing this as a kind of a hybrid in the future.
Absolutely. We've already looked at it. So this one will be a virtual one in October, but then our first one in February, we've already got plans to make it live and streamed. And from our perspective, it makes sense. Like, one, we had so many people join when it's virtually that it's, okay, great, we can help so many more people through this. But then when we do the live in-person aspects of it as well, like, we get to go to facilities, we get to see the good, the bad, and the ugly of what and how they're doing certain things. So we want to have our cake and eat it too, from that perspective, for sure. And it's just, there's no reason why we can't. So we're for sure going to do that.
Russ, if people want to go register for the event right now, where would you send them?
So they will go to amusement360.com/event. So it's amusement and then 360, the numerals.com/event. They can click on that. It'll get you signed up, no problem. There are a couple of tiered up paid options if you want to be able to do some deeper dives and collaborations with operators and roundtable discussions and things like that, and some additional resources, workbooks and tools and things, as well as getting access to all of the recordings in the future, being able to go back and review those and use those with team members that maybe weren't able to participate, you know, while the event was going on itself. And so we're really excited to be putting the second virtual one on this year and continuing the reach that we've been able to get with it.
Nice. Excellent.
Well, Russ, this was fantastic, and I can't wait for our next episode of the book club with Russ.
Yeah.
This should be like a regular feature, but
I love it.
Russ, we really appreciate your time, really appreciate all that you've shared today, and really obviously hope the best for your event, because you know we'll be part of it. So we're hoping that it obviously goes well, but obviously for you too, you guys are such great partners over there at Creative Works. Can't say enough about the great work that you guys do. So thank you again for your time, Russ, today, and for everybody out there watching and listening. We are all Attraction Pros. Thanks for listening to the Attraction Pros Podcast.
Make sure to subscribe so you can tune in when new episodes release, and even better, please leave us a review on iTunes.
For more information, visit AttractionPros.com.